And earlier this evening, I was joined by Paul Howes, the National Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, to talk first about the growing pressure over Craig Thompson, but also about union accusations that mining companies are helping to kill off manufacturing by importing cheap steel from China. As you'll see, Paul Howes thinks the government should ignore cries of protectionism and set mandates for the use of Australian steel and other manufactured goods in big infrastructure projects. He was in our Parliament House studio. Paul Howes, thanks for being there.
Thanks, Tony.
Are you starting to think the Craig Thompson affair could bring down the government?
Well, look, as far as I'm aware, there are no proven allegations against Craig Thompson. There's matters before the police, and they should stay with the police to determine whether there's any volition to the allegations that have been made.
All right, let me put it this way. Does the future of the Gillard government now depend on the credibility of Craig Thompson?
Look, I think there's a matter that is before the police. The police are going to conduct their inquiries, and everyone should be presumed innocent until they're proven guilty, and I think that should apply to Craig Thompson as well.
Well, we're not talking about his guilt or innocence, we're talking about his credibility. That's a different thing.
Well, I don't know, Tony. I'm not a police investigator, I'm not a court, neither are you, and the appropriate authority should determine whether he is credible or not in terms of his explanations over the allegations.
Is it time for the New South Wales Labor Party to now come clean and explain why they paid his legal bills for the defamation case and how much they paid?
Well, I think that's a matter for the New South Wales Party, and it's not my role to dictate to them on how they're going to operate. No,
but you'll have your opinions, and I'm asking for your opinion. Why are they drawing down the shutters when this will inevitably come out?
Well, I don't know that they've drawn down the shutters. I mean, ultimately, political parties should be free to govern their own internal affairs, and I think that's what the New South Wales Party is doing. To be honest, Tony, when I've lost 1,400 workers out of the steel industry over the last week, what's going on with Craig Thompson and the New South Wales Party really isn't my priority or what I'm concerned about at the moment.
I'll come to that, but we are talking about the future of the Gillard government, and you do have a stake in that. So the silence from Sussex Street means ongoing speculation about very serious questions. For example, did the New South Wales branch convince him to take the defamation case in the first place, to keep this out of the newspapers during the last election?
Look, I don't know anything about this. Tony, you're asking the questions to the wrong person. You know, I've come on to talk about manufacturing, and I'm happy to do that. In terms of Craig Thompson, my view is that, like any other Australian citizen, he should be presumed innocent until proven guilty. In terms of other issues concerning the party, I'm not aware of any allegations concerning the party's operations which would constitute any breach of the law, and so frankly they're irrelevant.
Do you know the answer to that question though?
What question?
The question about why the New South Wales Labor Party paid for his defamation costs.
I do not. I don't hold any position within the New South Wales Labor Party, and I'm not aware of
But you're incredibly well informed. If you were to ask that question, you'd get an answer, wouldn't you?
Well, and Tony, as I said, since Monday, all I have been focusing on is the future of the Australian manufacturing industry and the 1,400 workers at BlueScope Steel who are facing the prospect of unemployment, and these very important issues for the future of our nation and the number one priority for our union. OK,
let's move on to the subject you want to talk about, the future of the manufacturing industry, the crisis in the manufacturing industry, you could put it that way. The federal government appointed a steel supplier advocate today. It's taken 7 months to do that. Has that long delay damaged the steel manufacturing industry?
Well, look, I'm very pleased that appointment was made, and the supplier advocates play a key role in government policy in terms of boosting the participation of our industry in various procurement processes. I mean, I'm disappointed it took as long as it did. It should have happened earlier. I don't necessarily believe it damaged the industry because, frankly, the macro issues in the industry at the moment, principally our unprecedented high dollar and also the massive pressure and shift that the mining boom is putting on our economy is well beyond the control of one particular person within one particular department. But I would have preferred to see the advocate in place earlier, but he's in place now, and that's a good thing.
Were jobs lost as a result of this long delay? I mean, could he have had some effect on the industry? Obviously, you're expecting an effect by having one now.
Look, it's hard to say, but the issue about BlueScope Steel exiting the export market isn't something that the steel industry advocate himself would be able to control. The reality is we are seeing a fundamental shift in our economy. The high Australian dollar, caused by our extraordinarily high interest rates, the mining boom, the chronic devaluation of the Chinese yuan, is creating huge inequalities right across the economy. Now, one person by themselves can't fix that, but the government and we as a nation are going to need a long-term plan if we are going to continue to add value to our natural resources, if we are going to continue to have a viable industry which employs over 1 million Australians as opposed to the mining industry which only employs 200,000 Australians. I think both sectors should be able to win, but one person in one position isn't going to be able to determine that factor.
All right, the Resources Minister, Martin Ferguson, is effectively blaming the steel makers for many of these problems. He's saying they're not up to scratch, they're not competitive enough, and they're not efficient like the mining industry. Your response?
Well, they're not helpful comments, and shifting the blame at the moment isn't really useful. This is what we know. A report last week from the Australian Steel Institute showed comprehensively that only 10% of componentry in Australia's major natural resource projects at the moment is Australian-made. Mining companies are being pressured by foreign investors, but also through global supply chain channels, not to use Australian-made equipment in the mining boom. At the end of the day, the resources that are under the ground belong to all Australians. It's Martin Ferguson himself who said that on the coal seam gas issue.
Well, how do you explain, Martin Ferguson? We'll run out of time before we get a chance to answer this if we don't get this in.
We should have stayed off Craig Thompson then, Tony.
How do you explain, well, that's a very important series of questions as well, but how do you explain what Martin Ferguson is saying about your industry?
Well, I represent workers in both the minerals industry and the manufacturing industry.
OK, well, about the steel industry.
But it is not helpful. The reality is the mining companies in this country are getting away with far too much. They don't want to put anything back into the community. You saw their campaign against the mining resource rent tax and the RSPT. Now they're getting away with a situation where they're only using 10% of local content in their major infrastructure projects. There was a view that just naturally by itself, the amount of work coming from the resources sector would flow through into the manufacturing sector. It hasn't happened. And that's why plans like Eric Ripper's plan in WA to have comprehensive planning and demonstration of what componentry is being used on these projects has to be developed on a national plan. Just saying it's the manufacturing company's fault is rubbish. Clearly there is a shift in our economy and the government has a role in fixing that up.
Now, the government is spending vast sums of money on these giant infrastructure projects. Should they mandate a much higher level of Australian steel and Australian manufactured components in these projects?
Well, one of the reasons why we've lost so many of our export markets is the increasingly protectionist stances taken by foreign governments. We can't export steel into North America anymore because of the Buy America policies with their procurement policies in that country. Now, in a perfect world, a free trade environment with none of these procurement policies would be great. But the reality is, with the rest of the world taking increasingly protectionist stances, we too should make sure that we are mandating procurement policies that if Australian taxpayers' dollars are being used on these big infrastructure projects, Australian taxpayers should come first. Because
so at what level, we're running out of time, at what level should the mandate be set?
Well, this is what we need. This is why we need a comprehensive plan on what will actually save the steel industry during this time of an extraordinary high dollar until normal economic conditions return. I mean, the thing about the resources sector is once you dig it up, it's gone forever. But manufacturing are renewable jobs. They are jobs that can stay there for the long term. And we need to have Australian-made steel into these projects, particularly when Australian taxpayers' dollars are being used. And you can do that through tax incentives. You can do that through mandating. You can even just do it by getting these resource companies and the infrastructure companies to actually demonstrate and show to the Australian people what are they using and being open and transparent about how much they are spending on local procurement. A
final question. Peter Beattie's been appointed as a kind of roving ambassador for Australian manufacturing exporters in South America. Is that going to work?
Well, look, it's a positive step forward, and the more people we can have out there advocating for Australian industry, both here and overseas, is good. But these types of individuals aren't going to solve the issue. We need a comprehensive plan to deal with this major shift in our economy. We had a major shift in our economy in the 1980s, and that was attached to major industry plans that assisted communities in adjusting to those problems. The car industry, the steel industry at the time, and so on. We're going to need the same type of plans again if we are going to not see widespread unemployment and widespread closures in regions where there aren't resource jobs to be able to mop up those workers. And remember this, 200,000 workers in the resources sector, 1 million workers in manufacturing. The fact is there aren't the jobs available in the resources sector to absorb all the losses that will continue to happen in the manufacturing sector if we don't actually take action now.
We've been seeing this happening for a long time. Why isn't there a plan in place already? Is that
we haven't seen it for a long...
Well, with respect, the Australian industry group's been talking about this for a very long time.
Yeah, but in terms of the dollar, we've been seeing this for 2 years. And yes, we should have acted earlier. But let's not sit around having a blame game. Let's not be too defensive about what government policies are there. I don't care about that because, frankly, manufacturing today is in its worst crisis since the Great Depression. It is worse than the GFC. Every CEO that I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks is telling me that. And the time has come for action. The time has come for a comprehensive plan, and we need to make sure that we keep this industry alive, because if we don't, the impact on manufacturing centres across Australia will be drastic, it will be severe, and it will create a type of society that I don't think most Australians want. I don't think most Australians want us just to be a big sandpit for China and a tourism resort for North Asia. I think they want to see us value adding to our natural resources. Sure, we have to change the way we're doing that. Sure, we need to adjust, but it has to come through a comprehensive plan from the federal government.
Paul Howes, we'll have to leave you there. We thank you very much for coming to join us tonight.
Thanks, Tony.